The National Association of Equipment Leasing Brokers is the only leasing trade association developed by brokers for brokers. NAELB is over 10 years old, has more than 500 members from across the United States and Canada, and is growing rapidly every year. The NAELB is underwriting this tape series for our members as part of our ongoing commitment to excellence in leasing education. There are many compelling reasons for brokers in the leasing business to join NAELB. All members of the association subscribe to a code of ethics and agree in writing to be held accountable to that code. Members have free access to the NAELB attorney to assist in resolution of disputes, review contracts, or ask help with any legal question. We provide our members with dispute history information on funders and other brokers to assist in fraud prevention. NAELB has many funding sources that participate in our educational conferences throughout the year. Those sponsors help reduce the costs of these events to our member brokers. However, those funding source members are not voting members of the NAELB. That privilege is exclusive to broker members. It's the broker members who run this organization. The association website at www.naelb.org continues to grow and provide members with funding sources, information on fraud prevention, leasing education, and direct contact with their NAELB Board of Directors. As the leasing industry continues to change, brokers need to continually educate themselves to stay competitive and improve their bottom line. If you or someone you know would benefit from all the services provided by being a member, contact the NAELB at 800-996-2352. Welcome to the NAELB Education Series presented by Bob Baker. Bob is the Director of Education of the NAELB and was the 33rd person to receive the prestigious designation of Certified Lease Professional, CLP, the hallmark of knowledge and excellence in the equipment leasing industry. Bob was the first recipient of the Bill Guarneri Top Gun Memorial Award. Bob brings to this educational series over 30 years' experience in finance and leasing, and is founder and president of the Wildwood Financial Group, the premier leasing education company in America today. Thousands of leasing professionals have attended Bob's seminars, workshops, and presentations through the years. We think you'll find that Bob's relaxed approach to the subject of leasing makes it easy to understand the key concepts that underlie success in our industry.
Hi, I'm Bob Baker, and I am very excited, as well as being honored as the Director of Education of the National Association of Equipment Leasing Brokers, the NAELB, to present to you this video training series. This series is designed for the novice as well as it is for the person that's been in the business for quite a while, and it can be a refresher for folks that have been in the business for a long time. I'm going to be talking to you for several hours on these videotapes to give you some very specific knowledge, but I want to do this in a format that is just like I was sitting talking to you, so it is not designed to have everything exactly as it would be in a CPA's mind. It's not to be exactly as it would be in as an attorney's mind. So these are general, overall things that we're going to try to share with you today. So, you know, as with anything else, you should always get the opinion of your attorney or your CPA for specific legal or accounting issues. Now let's spend some time on sales and marketing. This is kind of the fun part of all this, and I think it's probably one of the primary reasons that a lot of you folks are turning around and you're watching this videotape series. One of the things I want to mention about marketing before we even get started is that there are a lot of different ways to skin the cat. I'm just giving you, what I've seen over the years and what I've done that I believe is very successful. There's a lot of different ways, just like in playing chess or bridge, that you can play the game in a lot of different ways and still end up with some very positive results. So you have to kind of take things from one person and another person and your sales manager and people that have been successful in the business, and hopefully some things out of this video series, and kind of put them all together, and you have to make them work for you. So I'll give you a few things that I think may be of help to you. I think number one, the thing to remember is that in small ticket leasing, transactions under $100,000, and I think that's the area that most of you will be involved in, is that it really all starts with the vendor. Most leasing takes place at the vendor level. The thing to remember is to give you probably a good analogy to this, the last statistics that I saw showed that 76% of automobiles in this country that are financed at the dealership. Why are they financed there? Is it because they're cheaper? Not necessarily. I think you'll find the primary reason is that it's much more convenient for the end user. They go in to get a car, they make the decision, they fill out the credit application, that's processed, they come back in after it's approved, they sign their paperwork, they take their car, and there's a lot less grief involved. They could obviously go to the bank, go up there and probably get just as good a transaction or deal as far as payments and things, maybe even a little bit better, but they'd have to leave the car dealership, go up to the bank, give them all the information, get it approved, and it would probably take longer for the approval. Then they've got to go up to the bank and they've got to sign all the documents and get the check and take it down to the dealership. So it's a lot more convenient. Statistics show that most companies, if a vendor has a good financing program, they will avail themselves of that program rather than go out and get the financing elsewhere. So it's really important to remember that it all starts with the vendor. The other thing that I think is very important in this business, and probably one of the neatest, most fun parts of this business, there are a lot of industries out there like car sales, financial planning, insurance, that the basic carrot that is put out by these companies is that if you go out and sell John an insurance policy or financial planning or a car or something like that, that John will refer over his mother, brother, next door neighbor, friend, and that type of thing. And so business breeds business. You can ask anybody that's in financial planning or is in insurance or in car sales. Sure, they get some referrals from customers, but they don't get very many. In our business, the repeat business in this industry is absolutely phenomenal. For example, let's say that you were to go out and set up a vendor that sells computer systems, and you get an application in on a $20,000 computer system. You put 8 points on that transaction, so we turn around and we have, number one, a vendor who's made a $20,000 sale. They're happy. Two, we have a lessee that has their $20,000 computer system because they're approved and they're happy. And you turned around, or your company turned around on that 8-point $20,000 transaction, brought in $1,600 worth of income. So it's a win-win-win situation. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you're going to continue to work with this vendor to develop ongoing business and get business coming in them from a regular basis. At the same time, this end user that you did the computer system for, you should be soliciting them at least verbally once every other month as a minimum. Call them every other month and say, is there any other equipment acquisitions that you're going to be looking at over the next few months? We'd love to handle those for you. And at the same time, they should be getting a letter from you or something in writing at least every other month, saying basically the same thing. So at least once a month, there's some kind of contact from you to this customer, which you already have a lease. Remember this, both with lessees and users and the vendors themselves, it is 6 times more expensive in time and money to go out and find a new customer than to turn around and support and take care of an existing one. So what tends to happen in this business, and again, this is the neatest thing, the part about this business, in my opinion, is that end user that you did that computer for calls you up and says, Bob, you did that computer system I did last October, and you keep sending me these letters and calling me, and now it looks like we're going to have to get a new computer or a new forklift for our warehouse in the back because our other one is just kind of falling apart, and that's going to cost us about $50,000. Can you handle that? And you go, sure, not a problem. So you get them approved for this $50,000. Now you're calling up a vendor who you've never had a conversation with. You've never talked to them. and you're saying, you know, we've got a mutual customer, Steve Smith, and we're going to be handling the financing on that forklift that he's acquiring from you, and I have him approved, and what I would like to do is get an invoice from you because I've got a check here for $50,000. There is not a better introduction into a vendor than to be calling them up to get an invoice and writing them a check. So really everything can start with a vendor, because you get an application in from a vendor, you continue to get ongoing business from the vendor, and you turn around and those end users can get other equipment, which leads you into new vendors, and lessees lead you into vendors, and vendors lead you to deals, and deals lead you to vendors, and the business just perpetuates itself. And if you're doing it right, it can actually do that exponentially, because, you know, one transaction can lead you into 4 or 5 different vendors that can lead you into 4 or 5 different types of deals. So it is very, very important that we do a good job with these vendors. Now, a very important point, and one of the biggest single problems that I see in my travels is that most brokers are trying to do way, way too much business. You know, if you think about a banker and their job at a bank doing loans, half of their job is to put that money out in loans. The other half of their job is to get the money back. In your business, your job, half of your job is to go out and set up these vendor relationships. The other half is to keep these vendors so that you don't have a swinging door. Very few brokers have very many vendors that they can say they've been doing business with year after year after year. You've got to put these vendor programs together properly. You've got to do them right. And if you are doing them right, a good vendor is going to be very high maintenance. So the salespeople that are out there saying, you know, my intention is to get 20 or 30 vendors doing 5 or 10 deals a month, are just sitting there smoking their pipe, because there is not a salesperson in this business that has 30 vendors doing 10 deals a month. That would be 300 deals. Number one person couldn't even conceivably begin to handle 300 transactions a month, and there's a vast majority of the funding sources out there with all the brokers that they're doing business with that don't do 300 transactions a month. For the sake of this presentation, let's try to use this as a number. Let's say that we're going to use an average transaction of $30,000, and you're only going to put 5 points on it, which is extremely conservative. So 5% of $30,000 is $1,500. If you have a small vendor only doing 2 transactions a month with you, that's $3,000 in income. If you have 3 vendors doing 2 transactions, that's only 6 completed transactions a month, that's $9,000 or $108,000 a year in income. So this is not a business that you have to do in tonnage. This is a business where you have to work smart instead of hard. And if you do that, you will find that this business can be a lot of fun, and the business can perpetuate itself very easily. If you turn around and try to deal with a lot of different vendors and a lot of different regimens, then you're going to run into a situation where you're going to be a master of nothing, and you're going to have a very difficult time being successful in this business. Now, we've talked about vendors being where it all starts. I think one of the things that might take a little bit of discussion here, and there's no question in my mind I will get some disagreement on this with some folks, but the question always comes up, or I have the question asking me a lot, you know, am I better off to go after end users, or am I better off to go after vendors? Here's how I feel about end user business. If you have a lease on the books, in other words, you've got a vendor who has sent you a transaction and that lessee now becomes your customer, you obviously want to continue to solicit them on a very, very frequent basis to try to get additional business out of them. The problem that I have with going out and trying to get end-user business direct, in other words, calling on a company to get their business, is simply this. If you take a company that might be down the street from you, you know, where you're doing this as a physical presentation or even on the phone, let's say, for example, that you have a meeting with the president of the company and the chief financial officer, and you do an Academy Award presentation with them on leasing, you may get a comment like, boy, you know, we knew leasing was good, but we had no idea it was this good. We should be leasing everything that we do. And you go, absolutely, and we can handle that for you. Well, then you tend to get the response, boy, I wish you'd have been around here 3 months ago when we just spent $100,000 to put in this new piece of equipment in our plant back there, which means that piece of equipment has already been financed and it's done. Or they say to you, well, the next time something comes up, we will certainly give you a call. So unless you happen to be talking to this person at the time when they're getting ready to acquire a piece of equipment, there's a good chance that you're not going to get the business. A lot of people feel that they're going to be getting business down the road from them because they've made this presentation, but again, quite frankly, in many cases that I see, the end user, when they're talking to the vendor, if the vendor is using their program properly, will still tend to use the vendors because it's just more convenient for them than to leave there and call you and get a hold of you to do that transaction. So a lot of times, in my opinion, doing end user business tends to be more you've got to be in the right place at the right time. And again, I like to put a lot of emphasis in leasing on working smart and not hard. When you're dealing with vendors, you have a sales force out there. That sales force, if you put a vendor together, program together properly, those salespeople will be an extension of you. The propensity for a vendor to lease is there every day. They have to move product and they have to use financing to do this. One of the things that I feel very, very strongly about, and I would argue tooth and nail with anyone, is that in the United States today, if a vendor is selling a product into the commercial market for $10,000 or more, and they do not have an excellent financing program, they will not be in business for very long. They have got to have a finance vehicle for their customers. If you think about a car dealership, for example, do they have to have a finance department in a car dealership? Absolutely not. Every one of those customers that they're getting approved, for the most part, can go up to the bank or a finance company and still get approved. But how long do you think a car dealership would be in business if they didn't have financing available and handle it for their customers right there on the spot? And I think that you would agree that they would be hard-pressed to stay in business for any period of time if they didn't offer that service and the financing to their customers. So I'm going to concentrate with you on vendors in this presentation, and I think really we have three things that we need to talk about that are key to vendors and vendor development. Number one would be, how do I find these vendors? What vendors do I go after? How do I find this business? After I have found them, how do I close them? And then lastly would be, I've sold them on doing business with me, but how do I keep them? How do I keep them from going to another leasing company? And how can I retain them, like we were talking about earlier, where I'm doing business with these vendors year after year after year? Abe Lincoln made a statement that I think is just so appropriate to this industry and to vendor development. And Abe Lincoln said, if I had 8 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend 6 of them sharpening my axe. One of the big problems in this business is that most leasing salespeople do not take the time to learn their industry and to learn about the vendors that they're trying to go out there and close. This business has made drastic changes over the last few years. It has always been in a situation of evolution. This industry has been changing all the time. We're going through changes right now, and if you are not a more professional salesperson in this day and age, I can absolutely guarantee you, you will not survive in the leasing business in this next millennium. The plain and simple fact of the matter is, research will show us that when we interview vendors and we say, you know, all things being basically equal, what is going to be the main criteria in you picking the leasing company you're going to do business with? And the answer is going to be they're going to do business with a more professional salesperson. So the old go out and talk to vendors or get vendors on the phone with a bunch of yabba dabba do and telling them how great and wonderful you are just does not get it cut anymore. They're going to do business with more professional salespeople, and that is going to be extremely important. Now, one of the things that I feel extremely strongly about is that I believe to be successful as a salesperson in this industry today, with very few exceptions, and again there are exceptions, But to be successful, you need to concentrate in 2, 3, or 4 equipment regiments. You need to specialize in 2, 3, or 4 industries and work by industry specialization with no regard to geographics at all. Today, this industry can be done on the telephone virtually without going out and seeing a vendor at all, if you want to do that. The old going down the road and making appointments and calling on vendors geographically close to the nest with you and trying to just find a transaction and find a home for it is not cost effective, number one. It's not efficient, and it just works much better. The first 10, 15 years that I've been in this business, we pretty much called people up, tried to get an interest level, set an appointment with them and go out and see them, or we would just go in and stop by and see them and try to close them. For those of you that have done outside sales, for the most part, you're looking at maybe 4 appointments a day, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. One thing can be relatively assured 90% of the time. When you go out to see that customer, you're either going to be hot, cold, or wet. And so it's not exactly a fun thing to be out on the street making these appointments anyway, and the chances are highly likely of these 4 appointments that you have, of the 2 in the morning and the 2 in the afternoon, that one of them, for one reason or another, will stiff you. They forgot about it, they got tied up, they got into another meeting or whatever. So now you're down to 3 people that you're talking to. There is no question, at least in my mind, that in an eyeball-to-eyeball presentation, your closing ratio is going to be much higher. But at the same time, when you're working on the telephone, you can talk to 50, 60, 70 vendors a day, and that in sheer numbers is going to turn you up more business than going out and seeing 3 or 4 customers a day. So the first thing that I think needs to be done when you're starting in this business is that you need to do research on the industries that you're going to go after. Quite frankly, when I do outside training, this is one of the problems I can have with managers sometimes, because one of the things that the salespeople need to do is be researching industries, and we're going to talk about that in depth here in just a second, but we're talking about reading trade magazines and things like that. The typical sales manager, when he walks by a salesman's desk and sees him reading a magazine, he's saying, "Why aren't you on the phone?" And so I think it's very important that managers also understand this, because you've got to have your folks researching the industries that they're going to do. Now, there's a few things that you can use that are excellent tools out there, and I'm sure in each one of your companies you have some other methods at work, and again, there's a whole bunch of ways to get to the same end result. But just to give you a couple suggestions, one of them would be the Thomas Registers. Now, the Thomas Registers is a 32-volume set of books that weighs about 200 pounds. They're available in the library for free, and what these books do is that if we had a manufacturing facility, for example, and we had a lathe that broke down, we can go to the Thomas Register, look up lathes, and it tells us who all the manufacturers of lathes are, their dealer and distributor network, and things like that. So it's an excellent source to be able to get leads. The Thomas Registers are now available on the internet free. The address for it is Thomas Register, ThomasRegister.com. And you can go into the Thomas Register and look up a particular type of equipment and strictly print it off. Now, the other thing that's out there are, every industry has trade magazines. These are magazines that are written specifically for that trade. These magazines are typically not available at newsstands. You can't buy them. They strictly go out to the trade. Now, there is a directory called the Bacon's Directory, as in bacon and eggs, and you can go out, and that'll be at your major public libraries, and it will list every trade magazine that's published in the United States. By getting these trade magazines in and reading them, it will do things like let you learn the jargon in the industry. It will turn around and let you know the current legislation, the current trends, the current OSHA requirements, what's going on out there. So that if you read these articles in these magazines, which is part of your research, you will now become knowledgeable in that industry, and you will become a quasi-expert. At least you will know enough that you can talk intelligently with these vendors. If, for example, you were trying to do dental equipment and you were calling on a dental supplier, and the first question out of their mouth was, well, let me ask you a question. How long can you finance a pan for? And you say to them, excuse me, but what's a pan? That's probably going to be the end of the conversation with that vendor, because they know you know nothing about their industry. And if you were to say, didn't know that you still use bed pans in dentistry anymore, that might create a problem for you as well. Because a pan in dental is a panoramic x-ray. If you're dealing with a chiropractor, their x-ray is called a bucky. So you need to learn this jargon in the industry so that you can talk intelligently with the vendors. This information you can get readily out of these trade magazines, so it's very, very important that you take time to read them. And the trade magazines, of course, are going to be loaded with advertising specifically for that particular industry, so it's also an excellent source to be able to go out and find vendors. Another excellent place to be able to find business is on the internet. We could talk about this for a long time. Either you're already familiar with using the internet or you're not. If you're not, I'd be talking to a wall. And if you're already familiar with the internet, you know that there's 100 different ways that you can do some searches on particular industries and get up to speed. And this is another place that you can find the trade magazines and things like that. But the bottom line is, you've got to do research, research, research before you make call one in a specific industry. The next thing to do is to pick industries that are going to be good. And with some of you that are newer in the business, before you start doing your business in the research on a particular industry, you need to go talk to the president of your company or the sales manager or whatever that's been around a while and ask them before you start, is this a good business to go after? Now, I'm just going to give this to you generically, and there's a lot of exceptions to this rule, but one of the things that I suggest to new people, as an example, to stay away from, is that every new salesperson in this business wants to go after copiers, telephone systems, and computers. Now, probably we're in the 75 to 80 percentile of that equipment that is leased, and so you might say, well, that would be great to go after. Everybody leases those three assets. Well, that's true. But at the same time, every leasing company in the country is also calling on the copier vendors, the computer vendors, and the telephone vendors. So why do you want to be into a pool of piranha when you can go out and find other industries, you know, that are niches and more specific? And again, I think this is working smart, not hard. Now, there may be some of you that have background in computers, or you know people, or this is something that your company specializes in, and that's going to be an exception to the rule. But the key a lot of times is, number one, to fly under the radar of the bigger companies and be where they're not. If you start playing in the sandbox with these great big companies, they're going to blow your brains out. You can't compete with them in a lot of respects, and in other respects that you can. The key is to be where the other guy isn't. And to do that is to do a lot of research. And again, I'm trying to emphasize working smart and not hard. When we start calling these vendors or seeing these vendors and talking to them, I think there's one thing that is very, very important to understand. It may sound pretty obvious, but I think a lot of folks miss this. It's like not seeing the forest for the trees. Vendors care about one thing and one thing only, and leasing and financing are not one of them. They care about one thing, and that's increased sales, period. Now, here's the bottom line that I feel very, very strongly about. If you cannot put a program together that will generate a vendor more sales, they don't need you. There's nothing that you can do that the other guy can't. Do you think you have better service than somebody else? Do you think you have better pricing than somebody else? Do you think you'll get the documents done quicker? Do you think you'll get them paid quicker? Not true. You're going to have some people out there that you can beat them that way, but there's other people that are just as good as you are. They have the same intentions that you do. Okay? That isn't going to get you vendors. If you want to be successful in this business, you've got to make the vendor successful. If you can't bring a program to the table that will get them additional sales, they don't need you. And you're not going to retain that vendor over time. And again, the key is not to just go out and set up vendors, but to keep them. You don't want to swinging door vendors. I think probably a good idea at this point would be maybe to back up a minute and let's talk about a presentation to a vendor and kind of work on it from that standpoint a little bit. Let me give you a presentation to a vendor that I think you will find some commonality in what you may be doing or what you've heard in the past. But in my opinion, probably 60 or 70% of the salespeople that are out there in our industry, when they're talking to a vendor, the presentation goes something like this. Mr. Vendor, and this would be true whether you're in an eyeball-to-eyeball presentation or if you're in a phone conversation. Doesn't really make any difference. Mr. Vendor, you know, as I said, my name's Bob Baker and I'm with Wildwood Leasing, and we would really like to earn your leasing business. And we understand that when you take a credit application and you send it in to us, that that's a pending sale for your company. And if we're not able to get that financing approved for you, we know that there's a very good likelihood that you may lose that transaction. So we take it very seriously when we receive an application. We look at a transaction and say, does it make sense? If the transaction makes sense, we're going to find a way to get it done. We are very, very aggressive on the type of transactions that we approved. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Vendor, I can tell you that if we can't get that transaction approved, nobody else is going to approve it either. We pride ourselves on the service that we give our vendors. Typically, we can turn around and we can have you an answer back on this transaction within a few hours. And as soon as we do get approval on this transaction, we will request you to fax over to us an invoice. We will document that transaction and we will either hand carry it out to your customer that day, or we will Federal Express it overnight or use email to get it to them so that they have it immediately, and we will then, upon you delivering the equipment, have payment out to you within 24 hours. Like I said, I would really like the opportunity to earn your business. Would you let me have a shot at your next 6 transactions and show you what we can do? Now that is pretty much a typical presentation to a vendor. And I don't know what most of you think about that presentation, but I'll tell you what I think about that presentation. I think it's garbage, and I think it will not work anymore. Here's what we have done to this vendor. Here's what this presentation is. Mr. Vendor, we're a great company. If your customer can breathe on a mirror, we're going to get him approved. Then we're going to turn around and we're going to Learjet the documents out to him. And then as soon as we got that thing done, we're going to turn around and wire transfer the money to your account. So from the time that we get the credit application in here to you get your money is going to be 3 or 4 hours. Now, you know, that's being a little bit facetious, but that's basically what we're telling them. And what this whole presentation has been to this vendor is, Mr. Vendor, we're great. We're wonderful. You should be doing business with us. I want to ask you this question. What do you think that you have just told this vendor that 500 of your competitors haven't already told them in the past or tell them now? Nothing. And can you do any of these things better than your competition? Sometimes you can, but there's a lot of other people that have the same funding capability that you have, the same level of service that you have. That's not going to get it done. As I said earlier, you have to be able to show the vendor where you can generate them additional sales. If you can't do that, trust me, you will not have this vendor over time. Now, let me explain to you part of where the problem is here. The majority of vendors today still use leasing after they close the sale. They have talked to their customer, they have done their sales presentation, and the customer says, okay, this makes sense. I think this will work for us. What kind of financing do you have? And the vendor goes, oh, I have great leasing program right here with ABC Leasing Company, and they pull out their information and do a figure and say, I can get this done for you for only $731 a month. All I need is this simple one-page credit application filled in. The guy says, okay, great. So he fills out the credit deal, and let's say that you get the transaction done. Did you get an additional sale with your leasing for this vendor? My answer is no. All you did was salvage a sale that he already had, or you took care of a sale that he'd already made. The other scenario that they run into a lot is, vendors do, is the vendor is trying to sell this guy, and the guy says, well, this equipment sounds great and everything else, but boy, it's a lot more expensive than I thought. I just don't know that we can afford it. I don't know if it's in the budget right now. I just don't know. I'm really kind of torn here. And the vendor goes, oh, listen, we got a great leasing program. Okay, no down payment. We can get you into this piece of equipment for X number of dollars a month. I can have you approved tomorrow. And the guy goes, well, okay, if we can do that for that amount of money, okay, let's do it. Again, we salvaged the sale. We didn't create a sale. Vendors use leasing in the majority of the time after they've closed the sale. Now, if you think about this a minute and you're honest about it and you talk to people who have been around a while, it is very rare that you're going to get an A credit from either one of those two scenarios. You're going to get more the B's and C credits. The guy that's really good, that's going to buy the equipment, walks out of there and he's going to write a check for it anyway, or he's going to go to his bank. We need to show vendors how they can increase their sales. And we're going to be talking about specifically how to do that, okay, as we move down the road here. Now, I want to get real world and very practical with you here for just a minute, because everything I'm saying here may make a lot of sense, but the first thing we got to do before we can do any of this is we got to get somebody on the phone. Now, for the sake of the discussion we're having right now, I want you to make the assumption that getting leads is very easy to do, and we're going to show you, I'm going to show you a few ways to do that. That's pretty easy to do. So now we're going to be calling a list of people and getting them on the phone and talking to them about leasing. Now, the first thing that we need to discuss is who do we want to talk to. In my opinion, the person that we want to talk to is the sales manager. Some people will tell you that you might be better off to talk to the president of the company. It has been my experience that in an awful lot of cases that can be a total waste of time. And let me explain to you why I say that. A sales manager, if they're doing their job and they're bringing sales into that company, can pretty well do anything that they want to do. They can get away with murder. Some of you may know sales managers for companies that every Friday afternoon they're out playing golf and they show up late in the morning and things like that. And it's just like you're brand new, you may be brand new with your company and watching this video series. How long do you think you'd have your job if you're coming in an hour late every morning, taking 2 hours for lunch and sneaking out every Friday afternoon? Most of you would say, well, I'd probably get fired pretty quick. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you're bringing a ton of business into your company and you're coming in late every day, I don't think they really care, because most companies are paying you to get business in the door and making profits, not to punch the clock. So a sales manager, if they're doing a good job, can do pretty much whatever they want to do. I have had many occasions where we have closed a transaction with the president of the company and he thinks it's great, but the sales manager didn't implement it. And if the sales manager doesn't implement the program, it doesn't make any difference. And the president of the company, in most cases, is not going to beat up on him, because as long as the numbers are there, he doesn't want to tick this manager off and have him quit on him. So I think you're going to find that the sales manager is the person that you want to go to. Now, after you get this thing put together, obviously it would be nice to meet the president of the company and bring him up to speed on it. But the sales manager is the hammer here. So my suggestion would be call a sales manager. Now, here's another thing that I think is extremely important, and this is a corner that a lot of folks cut, and it's a huge mistake. I believe that it is extremely important that you know the sales manager's name before you make the call to the sales manager. If you call up and say, let me speak with your sales manager, or who handles your financing and that kind of thing, that's the kiss of death. It's not going to work. You've got these gatekeepers, and you've got to get beyond the gatekeeper before you can get to the sales manager. So here is what I would suggest you do, and I think you will find that this will work 99.9% of the time. When you call the company up and the receptionist answers the phone, say these words: who is your sales manager and what is your zip code? The receptionist thinks we're going to do what? We're going to mail them something. There is no intimidation there. So they say, well, our sales manager is Steve Smith or Mary Jones, and our zip code is 63051, and say, could you give me their exact title? And they say, well, sales manager, vice president of sales, whatever that title is. And you might even question a little bit, now do they handle sales for your whole company, or do they just handle regional or whatever? Well, they handle this region, you know, here. And say, well, now, do they answer to a vice president of sales or whatever? You can find out who the person is that ramrods the sales department. At this point, you sit there and say, is Steve available? Now, the receptionist is probably going to say, may I ask who's calling? And I'll say, Bob Baker. And she says, what company are you with? And this will be my response. Sue, I'm very sorry. I just got another phone call I've got to take. Could I please call you right back? What is she going to say to you? No, sir, you can't call me back. You're going to have to hold on and talk to Mr. Smith. I mean, that's not going to happen. She's just going to say, fine. So you hang up. Now you have that manager's name. Now you can wait a couple hours, you can call back the next day or whatever, and now you're calling in and saying, Steve Smith, please. And you're going to find that in a large percentage of the time, probably 70% or better, you'll go right into Steve Smith. The problem that a lot of salespeople run into is that they're calling up and they're asking for the sales manager, and the receptionist goes, who's calling? And you go, Bob Baker, what company are you with? Wildwood Leasing. Hold on a minute, please. And then she comes back and she says, oh, Mr. Baker, he can't wait to talk to you. You know, I don't think that's going to happen. You're going to get responses like, well, he said he's tied up in a meeting right now, or he's at lunch, or he asked me to take your phone number, or whatever. What's going to happen is when you're calling these receptionists, they're going to give you the third degree. And why they give you this third degree is the other big misconception. If I say to you, why do you think these receptionists want to know who you are and who your company is and everything, you're going to probably think it's because they don't want all these sales calls coming in. That couldn't be farther from the truth. A sales manager, by definition, cannot duck. They have to take calls. The reason you're getting the third degree is that generally when somebody calls up and says, who's the sales manager? I want to talk to the sales manager. It's a complaint or a problem. And the sales manager has told these receptionists, I don't want to be blindsided with this stuff. You know, somebody calls in, I want you to find out who they are, tell them I'll get back to them, so I can go in and I can turn around and pull out that file or talk to the salesman or the service manager and find out exactly who that customer is. So the bottom line here is that we need to get to this sales manager properly, because if we don't, you're going to have a difficult time getting the right person on the phone to talk to. Now, in order for us to be able to put together a good vendor program that we talked about, because, you know, if we work under the premise here, in order for us to get this vendor relationship and to turn around and be able to keep this vendor over time, we're going to have to help them generate more sales. Well, how do we do that? How do we go about getting them more sales? In order to do it, we've got to know in depth three things. We have to completely understand this vendor, how they're set up and everything, and we're going to talk about that at length here in just a minute. We need to understand their specific product line, costs and everything like that. And then we need to know who their typical end user is, because we need to be able to do that to figure pricing and who our proper funding source and things like that are going to be. Well, how do we go about doing that? Well, first of all, we're going to get this sales manager on the phone, and we've talked about specifically how we want to do that. Now let's make the assumption for a minute that we now have the sales manager, who in this case is Tom Smith or Mary Jones or whoever it is, and they come onto the phone and they say, this is Tom, can I help you? Now we know at this point in any industry, whether it's leasing or selling fire extinguishers, that we better get this sales manager's attention real quick. You know, that in most cases we got 15, 20, 30 seconds, and if we don't get their attention, we're in trouble. So what I want to do is I'm going to give you what I consider a sales presentation, and I'm going to do this entire sales presentation in under 10 seconds. And here's how the presentation goes. Tom, my name is Bob Baker. I'm with Wildwood Leasing. We are a commercial finance company. One of the things that we specialize in is widgets. And I want your leasing business. What do I need to do to earn it? Now let me go through that with you again. I'm calling up the vendor and I'm saying my name is, he knows who I am. I'm saying I'm with Wildwood Leasing, he knows who my company is. I'm going, we're a commercial finance company, he knows what we do. One of the industries that I specialize in is whatever his industry is. Not the thing I specialize, one of the things I specialize in is your equipment, because hopefully you understand his equipment because you've already done your research before you call. One of the things I specialize in is your business. I want your leasing business. We're telling them right between the eyes why we're calling them. And then I'm going to ask a question. What do I need to do to earn it? And that's a key word here, earn, not get it, earn it, because you do have to earn it if you want to get it. So my name's Bob Baker. I'm with Wildwood Leasing. We're a commercial finance company. One of the things that we specialize in is the material handling industry, and I want your leasing business. What do I need to do to earn it? Now, at this point, we're going to get a response to this question of what do I need to do to earn it, and you're going to find that you're going to typically get 3 responses. Number 1 response is, I already have a leasing company, they're doing a great job, I'm in love with them and I have no interest in changing. Or, I've already got a leasing company, they do a good job. Now, I've seen a lot of sales trainers and I've seen a lot of sales managers that at this point, the presentation now switches to something like, well, John, let me ask you a question. Is ABC Leasing Company doing everything that you think that they should be? Are they getting all your transactions approved? Are they giving you good turnaround? How's their pricing and this and that? In my opinion, when a vendor says to you, I have a leasing company and I'm happy, your best response is to say, John, thank you very much for taking my call. Goodbye. Because if they're already happy, what is the point of pursuing it? It's not going anywhere. A lot of times I see this happen and they're going, well, are they doing everything that they should be doing? Do you think they're approving all the transactions that they should approve? What you are saying is, I'll tell you what, I'd really like to get your junk. And people do this all the time with vendors. Do you think they're approving all the deals that they should be approving? Which you're getting back into that old scenario of, if your customer can breathe on a mirror, I'll get them approved. And then I see new salespeople going, well, I can't get anything but crap in here. All the deals I get in, I'm turning down. Well, of course. These sales managers only care about one thing. And they figure if they've got a leasing company stupid enough to be able to take all the junk that they can't get approved at their primary source and take a look at it, they've got nothing to lose. So they'll throw it up against the wall and hope one of them sticks. So if you've ever heard, all I get stuff out of the bottom drawer, now you know why. If you have a vendor that's already happy, the relationship he's got, just move on. One of the keys here is talking to a lot of people. You know, you can be as professional as you want, you can know your product backward and forward, but a very, very large part of getting business initially, for those of you that are new, is pure, unadulterated luck. You've got to be in the right place at the right time. If you call a vendor up today, he may say, I've already got a leasing company and I'm happy. If you hadn't have called him today, and you called him tomorrow, he might have just had 2 transactions turned down by his leasing company and he's ticked off at it. And that might give you a foothold in there to get your foot in the door. But, you know, it's the old adage, the more calls you make, the luckier you're going to get, which means you don't have the time to be jacking around trying to convince somebody that's already happy into turn around and changing boats in the middle of the stream. So if you have a leasing company, or a vendor that already has a leasing company and they seem to be satisfied with them, then just say thank you very much and move on. You have an unlimited number of vendors to work with. Okay? If you're working for a leasing company that says this is your zip code and you're only allowed to go get vendors in that particular zip code, even though this is probably going to get me in trouble, my suggestion would be go find another employer. Okay? You've got the entire United States to call on. And you, as we talked about, at a $30,000 transaction, with $1,500 being your commission on it, getting 3 vendors, doing a couple transactions a month, how many calls are you going to have to make to find 3 vendors? You want to find the ones that truly want to do business with you, that have problems now that you can solve. You can't find those if you're spending time trying to convince somebody that's already happy to switch. So number one, if they say, I've got a company, I'm happy, move along. The second response that you're going to get is, my customers all pay cash. I don't need leasing, I don't want it, I don't like it, you know, it's not for me. Now, I don't want you to say it to them in this words, but basically your response to that customer with most sales managers will be, well, do you realize that you could be selling a lot more product if you were selling a payment instead of the cost of equipment? When a vendor says to me, you know, my customers all pay cash, I don't need it, don't want it, don't like it, my response is going to be, and again, not in these words, is, sir, I'm very sorry to hear you said I'm stupid, but thank you for taking my call. Because that vendor's not going to be around anyway. Why mess with that guy? You're not in the education business with these people. Move along. Now, the third response that we're going to get, and this is the one that we're looking for, is they're going to ask you a question like, what kind of rates you got? Can you do this? Can you do that? How long is it going to take me to get an answer? And I think what you're going to find out is that this will fall into 5 categories, and you're going to be hard-pressed to find a question that a vendor would ask you that won't fall into one of these 5 categories. Number one, they want to know your pricing. Now, one of the things that I would suggest that you do as a salesperson in this industry is take the word rate out of your vocabulary. You're not going to see an insurance agent using the word insurance. They're using protection plan. They're using words like that. Don't use the word rate. It will get you nothing but trouble. You turn around and talk about pricing, payment factors, things like that, but you don't use the word rate. So, number one, they're going to have questions about your pricing. Number two, they're going to have questions about your credit criteria. They want to know what you can approve and what you can't approve. They want to know what the turnaround time is, how quickly they can get answers on these transactions. They're interested in how all the paperwork's handled and what's involved from that standpoint, and they want to know when they get paid. And not necessarily in that order. Some of them, they want to know how quick they get their money is the first question out of their mouth. Now, here's the thing that happens a lot. Let's assume you're working in small ticket, and they turn around and they say to you, well, let me ask you a question before we go any farther. How long does it take you to get me an answer on a transaction? And you go, well, usually we can have you an answer no problem in 24 hours. He says, I'll tell you what. I've got a transaction here right now. Nobody else has looked at it. I know this is a good credit because we've done business with them before. And as long as your pricing is competitive, if you can get this done in 24 hours, you can have the transaction. And you go, great. And he say, I'd love to look at it. And he says, well, give me your address and I'll Federal Express this to you tonight, and you'll have it in the morning. And you're going to turn around and probably say something like, well, just fax it to me. And then the vendor says, well, it's 130 pages long. And you go, well, how big is this deal? And he goes, $850,000. Now, can you turn that in 24 hours? Impossible. And what you did was, you did what salespeople tend to do. When they ask you a question, you're not sure the answer, you just pull it out of your rear end. The fact of the matter is, when they ask us what the turnaround is, we haven't qualified it yet. We don't know what size deal, we don't know anything about it, and we're trying to ask questions that we don't know the answer to. If the vendor says to you, what's your turnaround time, they put up a defensive wall. And you're going to have to answer that question, otherwise the wall will just get higher if you try to go around it. But the other thing I want you to remember is when they ask questions about turnaround time and rate and you know, how quick they get paid and all that, those are very positive things. That means that they have a concern. They're not happy with what they have. If they were totally happy with the leasing company they already had, they wouldn't have asked the question in the first place. So, what you don't want to do is answer questions if you don't know what the answer is. We don't know the answer to any of these. We don't know what kind of pricing we're going to give this vendor. We don't know what the turnaround time is going to be on these things till we see what size deals and type transactions we've got. We certainly can't tell them our credit criteria because maybe this person sells restaurants or maybe they only sell to new startups. You know, we got different criteria there. You know, paperwork and how quickly they get paid, you know, we don't know how long it takes to put equipment in, and if there's progress payments or a lot of other things involved. So if you don't know the answer to these questions, don't answer them, but you've got to give them a good response. So my suggestion would be, here's the answer you give them. If they say, for example, what's your pricing? And you can start off with whatever question they give you, but if they say, what is your pricing? I'm going to say, Steve, that's a very valid question, and I'm sure you have questions about our pricing. I'm sure you also want to know a little bit about our credit criteria, so you know what transactions we are able to approve for you and which ones we can't. I'm sure you want to know how quickly we're able to give you answers on your transactions, and I'm sure you're going to have questions regarding our paperwork and what's involved there, and most assuredly, I'm sure you want to know how quickly we're going to pay you. One of the things, Steve, that you're going to find out very quickly is that Wildwood Leasing is not like the typical leasing company that you're dealing with now or you've dealt with in the past. We take the time to get a firm understanding of your company and how you're set up. We take the time to understand your specific product line and your pricing and exactly what you're selling. And we also want to get a good understanding of who your typical customer is, because what we at Wildwood are going to do is we're going to set up a custom program for you, specifically designed for your company, your product line, and your customers. Tell me, Steve, how long have you folks been in business? Now, if he says we've been in business 8 years, you just made the first close towards the final close, because what you've said is, I understand that you have questions about all these things, but I'm not like the typical person, you know, or the typical leasing company. I need to understand a few things before I can give you an intelligent answer. If this is a potentially good vendor and a decent sales manager, they're going to understand that and they're going to equate to it. Now, I think right now is a very, very good time to bring up the golden rule of bureaucracy. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the golden rule of bureaucracy, but let me tell you what it is, and you've probably heard it. He who has the gold makes the rules. Now, when we're out there working with these vendors, who has the gold? We do. We are the ones that are going to get these transactions approved for them. We're the ones that are going to see that they get paid for their equipment. You do not want to have a vendor relationship where the tail wags the dog. This is a very, very huge problem with leasing salespeople. They don't know what to walk away from. It is just as important to know what to walk away from as it is to know what to go after. When a vendor starts telling you how you're going to do business with him, my suggestion is you put the silver bullet in your revolver and point it at their head and pull the trigger and walk away. Do not let a vendor tell you how you're going to do business. You tell the vendor the way that you do business, and if they don't want to do business the way you do it, then take your toys and go home. If a vendor, for example, starts saying, well, I want to know what your rate's on before we go any farther, my suggestion to you is to get in the vendor's face at that point and say, John, let me ask you a question. Is pricing the #1 criteria in your selection of a leasing company? Yeah, absolutely. I want to have the cheapest rates out there. Then go where the wrong people to talk to. You know, if you're looking for another leasing company, it's going to tell you they got the best pricing in the world. They can get every customer that you send them that can breathe on a mirror approved, give you a credit application and an 800 number and hope for the best. We're the wrong guys to talk to. And if this conversation at this point continues to deteriorate, smoke this guy and get to the next call. Life is too short to deal with idiots like this. So just move along, and remember, you can't close every transaction that's out there. And remember that we're only looking for 3 or 4 or 5 quality vendors. If you start spending a lot of time with a guy like this, trust me, they're going to start sending you a lot of junk. You're going to end up clogging up the sink at your office. You're going to get your your credit people ticked off because they're looking at a lot of crap. The funding source is going to have a low a low approval ratio on these things, and a lot of these transactions that vendor didn't have control of, and they're not going to happen, and you're going to be wasting your time. So remember the golden rule, and you need to be a good person with this, and you need to do it with integrity and everything else. But what I'm saying is, you got to have these vendors playing the way you play the game. If they start telling you how you're going to do business, trust me, that will not be a long-term relationship. And again, you're not working smart, you're going to end up working hard. We talked about we need to get in-depth information on the company, which in this case is the vendor, on the specific product line and on their customers, who their typical customers. So let's talk a little bit about the company itself, the vendor. It is very important that we get a good understanding of this structure. So let's kind of go through the basics here. And I'm going to jump ahead here because one of the things your funding sources are going to require is that you turn in a vendor profile on the vendors that you're doing business with. This has to do with fraud prevention, and we'll talk about this in a different section. But part of getting a transaction approved is not only the credit application and all the credit investigation on the lessee, they also want to know who this vendor is because they want to be sure they're reputable so they don't have a fraudulent transaction. You're going to have to do these vendor profiles, and I hear a lot of salespeople moaning and groaning about filling out these profiles. If you've done your marketing research properly and these questions that we're about to ask, to be able to develop a good program for the vendor, you should have 99% of the things that you need for your profile right there anyway. So this is information you kind of have to get anyway. So this is a much better way to get it. Number one, how long has this vendor been in business? Next, do they have specific geographical areas that they sell in? In other words, do they just sell locally? Do they sell on a regional basis? Do they sell on a national basis? Now, a very important question here is how do they generate their leads? Do they get their leads out of, they have a telemarketing group, or they do printed advertising in magazines and newspapers, or do they do a lot of trade shows? Do they have a direct sales force that's making calls or banging on doors or whatever it is? It's real important that we know how these leads are generated. Now, you might say, well, what's the big deal with that? Why do we really care how they get their leads? Keep in mind that the majority of vendors use leasing after they close the sale. What we want to do is we want to put a program together where they use leasing through the entire sales process to generate additional business, and not only just to generate it, but to get people to come in the door. Think what you can do if you can get a vendor convinced that you can get more people to come into them to buy their products with your leasing program. They don't even think that way. They think the only thing you do is get deals approved after they've gotten them closed. All right? We want to help them get business in the door. We want to get leasing involved in the entire sales process. Well, where does the sales process start? It starts with the lead, doesn't it? So if this company says, well, we get most of our leads out of printed advertising. We do a lot of advertising in a lot of trade magazines. Get those ads and take a look at them. You know, it could be something as simple as putting in that ad, financing available. Could bring them on more business. Or if their ad is pushing the new XLT 100, you know, and they've got them, they can push it in there, and they've got special introductory pricing, no down payment required, payments as low as $179.95. And keep in mind, we're an unregulated industry, so we don't need to get into this, you know, based on an MSRP of this and a down payment of this and a deferred payment price of this and an APR of this, subject to this and this and this. We don't need to do all that stuff. Payments as little as X number of dollars a month. So if they're doing it with a telemarketing group, we can help them rewrite the scripts to include financing and leasing into that script. If they're doing a lot of trade shows, and we're going to talk about that later on here, you can be there with them. But even if not, they're going to have 3 or 4 pieces of equipment they will take to the trade show, and you can have a trade show special and have nice signs made up at QuickSign or whoever it is for $15 that has show special. Special lease pricing, payments as little as so-and-so, no down payment, blah, 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 and help them get more business that way. And at the same time, we can also, if they have a direct sales force, we can train that direct sales force because that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is make them extensions of us. Now, after we have determined what the method is that they get most of their leads, the next thing that we want to know is what is their steps through a sale. In other words, every company has pretty much a set, we get the lead, we do this, we do that, we do this. You know, if it's a copier, for example, they get a lead, they go out and they talk to them, finding out what their actual needs are, how many copies they do, what the copier needs to do. They take a demonstrator out there and they let them play with it for a couple, 3 days, and then they turn around and, go through their various steps to a sale. So we want to know what those steps are. Why? Because we want to incorporate leasing into each one of those steps. And we're going to talk about some specific examples and how to do that a little bit later. Another question that we want to ask, and I want you to asterisk this, and I want you to turn around and underline it, and because it's very important, and that is to ask the question, what sets them apart as a company? What is it that sets them apart that makes them better than their competition? It is not only important that you ask this question, it's extremely important that they remember that you ask it. When you say to a sales manager, John, let me ask you a question, bottom line here. What is it that sets you apart from your competitors? I mean, bottom line, why do your customers buy from you instead of your competition? How many companies do you think a sales manager is going to say, because we have the absolute cheapest prices in town? I think you're going to find that to be very much of a rarity. The responses that you're going to get from these sales managers is because we give great service, because we have excellent support, we have superior product, we have a better warranty. Things like that. These are all what? Value-added things after the sale is why they should buy from them. Now, when you ask them what sets them apart and why they sell to people that their competitors miss, they're going to ramble. Let them ramble. Because number one, when they do this, it obligates them to listen to you. And number two, what we're doing here is we're going to set them up for a huge sucker punch. Because after we get all this information and we put this program together and we lay it out to them, which is going to be a superior program, they may say, well, this all looks really great, but you know, you're a little bit higher than the other companies that we use now. And you're going to say, well, you know, John, I guess our philosophy is pretty much the same as yours. You know, we may not be the absolute cheapest out there, but because of all the value-added things that we offer you as a vendor, I think that you'll see that the quality is there that certainly justifies that, and that you'd want to do business with us the same as it is with your product. You're not absolutely the lowest out there, but because of all the value-added things that you offer, your customers would be foolish not to do business with you, wouldn't they? Now, what is he going to do? Come back and say, well, all that stuff I told you yesterday, I was just kidding you? You know? So you can use this, and it can be a very, very good selling tool. The other thing is ask the question, what do you like about leasing? What are the positive things and the things you've liked about leasing? What we're saying is, would you please tell me how to sell you? And then we're turning around and saying, what are the problems you've had with leasing? What don't you like about leasing? And he's going to turn around and say, well, I've had this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. Now, if he's had problems that he's not going to have with us, we're going to make a big deal and point them out. If one of the problems that he has is nothing we can do anything about, then we don't talk about it. So basically, we're going to have this vendor telling us how to go about selling them. So the bottom line is we want to have these conversations with the vendor to understand their company, and the more that we understand, the more we know how to approach this particular vendor as far as his company goes. Now, the other thing, of course, that we would want to know is how many salespeople they have, what experience they have in sales, and things like that. Now, let's talk a little bit away from the company a minute, and let's talk about their equipment, the type of equipment that they sell. Now, we already know from our research before we call them what they sell. We know that they're selling computers or whatever, but we want to check and find out what their pricing is. So we want to know what the biggest transactions we're going to see from them are going to look like, what the smallest ones are, and what their typical one is, their average one. I don't like the word average, that can get you in trouble. But what are most of the ones, the transactions we're going to look at, what size are they going to be? Now keep in mind, we're only interested in the selling price here. We don't care about manufacturer's suggested price, and we don't care about cost. We want to know what they're actually selling it for. Now, the next question that is very important to ask, what percentage of that equipment is used equipment? I mean, do they sell new and do they sell used? Remember, part of what we're doing here in this interview is to be able to, when we get done, to pick who we feel will be our best funding source for this particular vendor. Some funding sources love used equipment, some of them hate it. So this is a very, very important question to ask. Now, next is we want to know what percentage of the equipment is for soft cost. Now, we're going to talk about that in another section, but it doesn't hurt to do it twice. Soft cost, for all practical purposes, are things that we cannot repossess. So we're talking about installation, training, delivery, extended warranties, and things like that. We want to know what those soft costs are because that is something that a lot of the funding sources will be sensitive to. The general rule of thumb there is that if it's up to 20% soft cost, you're fine, but if you start getting more than that, you can have a problem. The other thing is to be sure you get brochures on this equipment. Credit managers love color pictures, so try to get yourself 2 or 3 sets of brochures. They usually have no problem giving those to you, and that way you've got one for you and a couple for your funding sources.